Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 9 stories, from stories of graveyard shifts, killer plants, and more. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Takes a certain kind of person to work night shifts. Most people can't fathom the idea of getting up when the sun sets and going to bed when she rises again. I've been at Carter's Convenience for 3 years now, and in that time I've had around 20 potential coworkers try out the overnight shift with me. They usually last a few weeks before asking to be moved to the day shifts, or just quitting entirely. They find they just can't handle long hours of doing nothing but basic store keep up, at a time when they'd normally be fast asleep. Me? I don't mind. For one thing, I've always been something of a night owl, preferring the calm and solitude of the night of the glaring sun, and frantic hustle of the daytime. And while my colleagues have to deal with dozens, sometimes even hundreds of customers over the course of a single day, I usually only have 1 or 2 dozen customers on an average night. And let me tell you, there are some colorful characters who frequent convenience stores in the middle of the night. You've got the drunk stumbling home from the bar after last call, looking to buy a 6-pack to keep the party going, and some ibuprofen for the morning, if they're smart. You've got the stoners who just need their 3 a.m. Twinkies. You've got the haggard spouses making a midnight grocery run because their pregnant wives had sudden cravings for pickles and peanut butter. You've got the other night shifters like myself stopping in for a few necessities after work. And lastly, you've got the regulars, a particular type of customer who only comes to the store at night and only shop at Carter's Convenience for certain special products we offer. One such regular paid a visit last night, as he does every week. He comes every Friday night, or Saturday morning if we're being technical, at 2:22 a.m. on the dot. I had my nose buried in a book when I heard the bell above the door let out a dainty ding. I glanced at the digital clock I kept next to the cash register, saw the acid green 222s, and didn't even bother taking my eyes off the clock. "Evening, Jenkins," I said. "Evening, Hubert, my boy," came the raspy reply. "Yep, right on schedule." I looked up at Mr. Jenkins, standing at a towering 7'9" with skin like a 16th century tombstone. He was clad in his usual attire for his weekly trip to Carter's Convenience. A dark overcoat that stank of graveyard dirt, black gloves over spindly fingers, gray trilby atop his balding head, rounded glasses with jet black lenses perched on a smashed pug nose. He smiled as he tipped his hat at me, mouth full of jagged teeth the color of rotten tomatoes. "What's on the reading list this week?" Jenkins asked in his grinding gravel voice. A response, I lifted my book to show the cover of Crime and Punishment, and he nodded. "Ah, Dostoevsky. A classic, that one." "Yeah, I bought this book years ago, but only just got around to reading it," I said as I set the novel down. Couldn't let it gather dust on my shelf any longer. Jenkins chuckled. "Well, you know what old Sam Clemens said about the classics. They're the books that everyone wants to have read, but nobody wants to actually read." "Yeah, sounds about right. Pretty good read so far, though. I grabbed a keyring off a hook under the counter and stood up from my stool. Just the usual this week? If you would be so kind. The two of us made our way to the back of the store, fluorescent lights humming steadily overhead. We walked past the shelves lined with foodstuffs and toiletries and pharmaceuticals and other sundries. Basic goods for when you need to make a trip out for 2 or 3 things, but don't want to go all the way to a grocery or department store. At the rear of the shop, I unlocked the door to the refrigerated section and stepped inside, Jenkins following close behind. From there, I inserted another key into a second lock. This one nestled between the shelves holding the milk and beer. As the tumblers clicked, a part of the back wall slid away with a rumble. "Here's what we've got," I said, shivering slightly in the chilly air. Jenkins pursed his lips as he surveyed his options. Some of the jars on the shelves of the hidden alcove contained a wide assortment of hands, feet, and other body parts. Others contained nothing but crimson, handwritten labels detailing the blood types they held. One extra large jar had the head of a middle-aged male floating in amber liquid, glassy eyes staring at nothing. "Not much of a selection this week," Jenkins noted with a frown. "In fact, I'm pretty sure I saw some of these last Friday." "Been a slow week for inbound shipments," I said with a shrug. "The boss is expecting some fresh goods sometime in the next 2 or 3 days. Sorry I can't do much for you now, though." "Quite alright, my boy. I know how business gets sometimes." He pursed his lips. "I guess I'll take..." Jenkins was cut off by the sound of a slamming door, making us both jump. We turned, though the foggy glass of the refrigerator doors, and past the shelves lined with cold goods, we saw a masked man, Chad in all black, sweater pants, gloves, and ski mask. He quickly looked around and ran behind the counter and started fiddling with the cash register, smacking a handgun against the side. I sighed. Jenkins blinked. "Oh, well, that's a bit of good luck right there," he said, turning to me. "Shall I take care of this, Hubert? I know greeting the customers is supposed to be your thing, but..." "Yeah, go ahead," I said, wrapping my arms around myself. "Just make it fast. I'm freezing my balls off in here. And try not to make it too messy. Please?" Jenkins answered with a predatory grin, bearing those pus-colored chompers. "No promises, but I'll do my best." With that, he swaggered out into the store, freezer door swinging shut behind him. "Evening, my good sir," I heard Jenkins say, his scratchy voice muffled. "Terribly sorry, but I'm afraid only employees are allowed behind the counter." The would-be robber jumped. He visibly flinched at the sight of Jenkins and quickly raised his firearm in a trembling hand. "Freeze," the thief shouted, a tremor in his voice. "Don't fucking move." Jenkins surged forward, fast, cleared the distance from one end of the store to the other in a fraction of a second, so fast that the poor crook didn't have time to get a shot off before Jenkins was upon him, dragging him behind the counter. A primal scream of raw terror echoed through Carter's convenience, which abruptly ended in a choking gurgle. A spray of blood shot up to splatter against the wall, and I sighed again. This had to happen after I cleaned for the evening. Retail work. Am I right? The girl opened the door without knocking, just as I knew she would. My premonition isn't as good as some of my colleagues, but I can tell when the signs are obvious. I could feel her cocky anger all the way from the stairwell, and she had no intention of hiding it. She looked no older than 20. Her old, stained band t-shirt was too small for her. Her pale jeans, baggy and torn. Her white sneakers muddy, laces frayed. I didn't need clairvoyance to know what kind of life she lived. Old and fresh scars littered her arms and legs like a cartography of violence. Her body language like an animal in the wild, speaking of years of struggle and a deep lack of concern for her own well-being. Judith sent me. It doesn't matter who you are. Sit down. I gestured at the wooden chair opposite from me, across the old wooden table. She said you'd be expecting me. She surveyed her surroundings with wild eyes. The table and 4 chairs were the only items of furniture in the room. Beige wallpaper peeled from the walls, exposing grimy drywall underneath. Cracks in the white tiles provided shelter for tiny, multi-legged insects. A lone bulb illuminated the room with a sickly yellow light. She removed her dirty khaki backpack and threw it on the floor, then aggressively pulled the chair back before purposefully falling on it with all her weight. The chair creaking under the sudden pressure. I felt a hint of mild annoyance and put it away immediately. Such things come in the way of my job. Where's the equipment? She snapped. There's no equipment. Material things tie you to the material realm. But you didn't come here to learn about magic. I suppose not. Can you do it? She asked. Of course I could, but first things first. Let's see the money. I trust Judith told you what would happen if you show up without it. The girl lifted the backpack from the floor and pulled back the flap to the main compartment. She emptied it out onto the wooden table. I estimated about $50,000 in cash, and another 60 or 70 in high-end watches and jewelry. Thankfully, my contacts take various kinds of payment. Now there was the other matter. I needed to make sure she wasn't going to catch cold feet when I call him. My relationship with them was strained as it was, and I wouldn't like to strain it further. What else did Judith tell you? She told me that you're the one who can do it, that you can get to anyone. She told me about the lesser fee and the greater fee, and the stakes. You don't understand the stakes. That's the whole point. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I'm sure. I looked deep into her eyes, endless pits of hatred, the embers of resentment burning slowly, forged over years of agonizing, dehumanizing crawl on the grimy underbelly of the world. Her compassion fading away, eroding, voluntarily surrendered. Her incredible cold conviction chipping away at her humanity, all with a singular, all-encompassing purpose. To get here. I searched for a sign of hesitation and found none. So be it. I closed my eyes. It gets easier every time I do it. The material world fades away and I'm floating above the endless planes of the mind. The formless, colorless shapes stretch and bend. My mind exploring, searching, flying further, digging deeper, until I find him. Comes naturally, like pulling a thread that unwinds the cloth, or pulling a spring and letting it go. The energy contradicting and relaxing. Base reality comes rushing back like a tidal wave. When I open my eyes, he's sitting on the chair to my right. If the girl is surprised, she's not letting it show. Are you fucking serious? I just made it to the 5th layer. Wait to ruin the moment. The old man looked agitated, lip curling behind a white beard, hands crossed over his purple, gold-adorned robe. Sorry, Bridget. I'll make it worth your time. Don't give me that crap, Emma. You know I hate doing this. He leaned forward on the table, as if getting ready to leave. I knew he couldn't even if he wanted to. Not until we're done. Also, you don't get to talk to me like that. We're not friends. Fine. Let's get on with it then. I ignored the bitter taste in my mouth. You know why you're here. Maximoff, he said with disdain. Yes. Oh, how I wish I didn't have access to that fucker. Or that I didn't know you, for that matter. He eyed the pile on the table, his distaste obvious. Where he's from, it represents everything vile and pathetic. You still think you can find that, huh? When are you going to realize that no amount of money in the world is going to help you? He's wrong, of course. A millennia of walking the circle meant that he wasn't exactly up to date on the goings-on in the material realm. Even if I didn't care for it, money can get you all kinds of information in the 21st century. It's just a matter of having enough of it. Besides, I was getting close. Really close. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of debating my personal mission in front of my guest. So I stayed quiet. Did she ask you to do it? He gestured at the girl without averting his eyes from me. What about the other one? Did you ever check up on her? I didn't, of course. Following up on any of my clients would make doing what I do on a continued basis very hard. It's none of my business. He turned to my guest. Do you have any idea what you're messing with here, little girl? She looked at him defiantly. What is it, A broken heart? He studied her face intently. No, that's not it. Violence. He hurt you. And your family. You think he's untouchable. Unreachable. No one in this world is. And what is it you hope to accomplish with your petty revenge? This won't change anything. You know that? This isn't about revenge. The girl snarled. This is about justice. Justice? Burchett scoffed. Trying to explain justice, or any of the higher concepts to you, would be akin to explaining the ultimate truth behind the golden ratio to a housefly. You need at least another 500 years to even begin to grasp it. He leaned forward towards the girl. You think you're tough? Because you fucked a few old men for money? Because you lied, cheated, stole, murdered? Let me tell you something. What you're wishing upon him, not even the most evil man on earth deserves. Neither do you deserve what's going to happen to you once you take the deal. His nostrils flared. Do you know why we can't tell you what the fee is? Because if we did, you wouldn't take it. That's the only way the contract can still exist. These are the rules we are bound by, and what I'll take from you is nothing compared to what Maximoff will take. One look at her face told me all I needed to know. Burchett has been away from the material realm for too long. He lost some of the sensibilities that humans have. She didn't care that he's an otherworldly being from another plane of existence. To her, he's just another self-centered man, explaining to her why she shouldn't take revenge on another of his tribe. Not that it would matter if he wasn't. She was too far gone. The point of no return wasn't even a speck in the rearview mirror anymore. She turned to me, confidently meeting my gaze, as if telling me, if he doesn't want to do it, make him. Burchett? I addressed him. But he wasn't going to let it go just yet. Kid, I'm going to give you one last chance. Walk away now. Forget about this. Go live out the rest of your life somewhere. You can still move on. Once I call him, there's no going back. But it was no use trying to convince her. He must have known that this was what was going to happen as soon as he materialized in this realm. That any attempt to talk her out of it would be futile. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of deep, profound sadness in his eyes. A millennia in the circle should completely erase one's ability to feel any of the base emotions. But I guess old habits die hard. Don't say I didn't warn you. Burchett didn't need any of the tricks I used to access the higher planes. In a moment, the chair to my left wasn't empty anymore. A figure sat there, clad in black, leathery robes, swaying without any wind, as if breathing in a grotesque imitation of a living thing. Deep scars covered his body, next to flesh, festering wounds, the unimaginable, terrible burden of residing in the 11th layer. His long black hair resting on scrawny shoulders, one eye permanently shut, the other, a brilliant, boyish blue, quickly flickered from birdchat to me in brief acknowledgement. Can't make time for formalities when you live in a place where every day passes like 1,000 years. I thought to myself. His face, forever young, turned to the girl, but his voice betrayed his true age. He spoke, his raspy voice like 1,000 rattling bones, a leviathan from the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean, a cosmic supernova exploding into 1,000,000 galaxies. Say his name, and it will be done. And she did. 5 minutes later, they were gone. The girl took her empty backpack and left without a word, her expression betraying the same feeling they all arrive at in the end. The burning fires of hatred extinguished, the hot fuel that inspired years of struggle and anguish gone, leaving a hollowed void behind, the empty feeling of a purposeless existence. She will have another 24 hours before the piper is paid, and despite myself, I hope that she would use them well. Not that there's anything she could do now. Her fate is sealed, and so is the fate of the one who wronged her. I was just the emissary, as I will continue to be. Now you know. If so your heart desires, you will find me. When you open the door, I will be waiting for you, and you will have a chance to exact your justice, if you're willing to pay the price. Be prepared. There are so many people in this world that hate spiders. I'm not one of them. I've loved the creepy crawlers ever since I was a kid. So when I was finally able to find a good job at the marketing company and move away from my parents, I've spent more than $400 for an enclosure, food, and other equipment for a sweet female Mexican red-knee tarantula. I named her Ice Cream, just because I thought that would be hilarious to combine humanity's greatest love and greatest fear in her. In the town where I moved to, people were all welcoming and friendly, even to a girl with a strange spider obsession. Many people in the area were actually willing to come to my place and see Ice Cream while I could serve them my homemade potato biscuits. However, there was just one rule. No touching. If you are allergic to her bite, you could die. And if you drop her, she will die. But most people were kind enough to let her be, except for Madame Davidson from across the street. Madame Davidson was a very old, very eccentric lady. She was demanding us to call her Madame, although most kids in the town were calling her Old Witch. She really resembled a witch with her long nose, wrinkly face, toothless smile, and a habit of wearing black clothes only. She also liked to collect stray cats and even dogs. But nobody has ever seen her with an animal. Some people went far enough to call some animal rights organizations, but they'd never find anything unusual. They believed that the animals she brought home would run through the always open back door of her house. However, people were wary of her all the time. I had the misfortune to meet her one evening while I was carrying some fresh cockroaches for Ice Cream. She rudely asked me what is it that I have in the bag. I thought that she might have mistook the bugs for dog poop and thought that I was about to drop it in her garden. Those are just some roaches from my pet, I said politely. Oh, so you keep lizards? She asked. No, I smiled. I have a tarantula. Her name is Ice Cream and she's very... Madame Davidson interrupted me by screaming out a whole word salad with sauce. I barely understood anything, but she was threatening to kill both me and my spider, and that I was crazy for keeping it, and so on. I guessed that she really hated spiders and moved on. but she hit me with her bag, staring at me with her piercing pale blue eyes. I dropped the bag with the cockroaches, which exploded, and they ran away in all directions. I cursed and turned to her, but I saw that she was smiling. Her toothless smile was so creepy that I immediately turned away and went home. Luckily for ice cream, I had one cockroach in the kitchen. 2 days later, Madame Davidson had died. I saw an ambulance in front of her house when I was driving home from work. The doctors told me that she had a stroke. It turned out that she actually had a son who was calling her every evening. When she didn't respond after 3 calls, he called 911. They found her dead on the sofa, with the evening news turned on the TV. She was 87. I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune to live next to a house of somebody who had just died, but it's not a nice feeling. It somehow haunts you. I was feeling guilty for having that short argument with her. I knew that it was highly unlikely that I've caused her stroke, but, I was feeling guilty. It was all amplified by the fact I couldn't attend her funeral, as that day I had an important meeting with a client. I wanted to do something nice for her family and all, but I didn't know what. But during the weekend, her son and his wife and kids collected all of her belongings and held an open sale in her garden. I was curious to see what they might be selling, so I approached. There were mostly things one would expect in an old lady's home. Knitting equipment, ancient teapots and cutlery, old chairs, paintings, and so on. But what caught my eye was a houseplant that she was keeping. It resembled a mistletoe, being round and bush-like with dark green leaves. However, it had many bright red flowers, and it seemed so pretty even though it was slowly drying up. I thought that it might look nice in my living room. $2, said Mr. Davidson. I was surprised by the extremely low price. I mean, the plant did look a little bit out of shape, but it was big and certainly would cost more. It's because the pot unbearably stinks, he explained to me. I can't wait to get rid of it. I brought the plants home and, was Mr. Davidson right. It was barely noticeable in the open, but now, in my living room, I could feel the awful stench. It felt almost like a corpse. I knew there were some tropical plants that naturally smell like corpses to attract the flies that pollinate them, but this was ridiculous. I decided to see if there was something bad inside the pot. I took the plant out and, I almost threw up on the floor. A corpse of a cat was rotting away around the plant's roots. I believe that the old lady was senile enough to bury the cat inside the pot. I mean, old people do all sorts of crazy stuff when dementia hits them. I opened all the windows on the house, took a cleaning mask, which had no effect at all, and a pair of gloves. The cat must have been there for quite a while because the roots have grown all over its corpse. It took me more than an hour to remove all the remaining bones and fur. Then I washed the plant's roots, threw away all earth from its pot, and I left the plant in a bucket with some water nearby Ice Cream's terrarium. I've never seen her act so strangely. The moment she noticed the plant, she ran out of her favorite hiding spot and started banging onto the glass. "What's wrong with you, silly spider?" I exclaimed and tried to pacify her. However, she was trying to bite. This has never happened before. Maybe she was set off by the pungent smell. I removed the plant away from her enclosure and placed it next to the window, but Ice Cream was still on full alert, with her front legs upright, a clear sign of aggression. She was facing towards the plant. I had no real will to get into a tarantula's silly brain. I needed to remove the horrible smell from my body that instant. I took an hour-long shower. I used up half of the shower gel and almost all of the shampoo. While I was cleaning myself, I noticed that I cut myself on the left wrist as I was cleaning the plant. I sighed, hoping that it won't provoke weird questions from my colleagues on Monday. When I woke up the next morning, the plant was already looking better. It was probably one of those plants that need plenty of water to survive, I thought. However, Ice Cream was not better. She was still aggressive, trying to bite, and she didn't even notice when I gave her a cockroach for breakfast. I seriously began considering taking her to a vet, but I had to rush to my work. While I was coming home, I stopped by a gardening supplies shop and bought a new pot and some earth for the plant. I also removed it from the living room and put her on my desk. This actually caused Ice Cream to calm down a little bit. Madame Davidson was probably terrified of spiders, I thought. Maybe this particular plant had some spider-repelling qualities. I was feeling sorry for Ice Cream, but as the days passed, she seemed to have recovered. However, every time I was leaving or entering the room, I could see her lifting her spider paws and laying them onto the glass. She would sometimes even bang it. You know, tarantulas do not have any ways of showing expressions, but I knew that she was very worried about something. The spring was slowly turning into summer, and the days were getting longer. Maybe that was the thing exhausting me. I didn't know what was going on. I was feeling so weak, especially if I had to bend over or squat. Getting up, I would see numerous violet spots floating in my field of vision, blurring it. I would sometimes shake for no reason. I would lose my breath by just walking to the car. I was feeling endlessly tired, and it was getting worse. I would get out of breath for just moving around the house. I had a constant headache, and my vision would often double. One day at the office, I dropped my pen. As I bent over to grab it, everything turned black. I finally lost consciousness. I woke up at the hospital, and by my right side was a packet of blood. The nurse immediately called for the doctor when she saw that I was awake. I was feeling drowsy and inexplicably weak. I probably haven't eaten for a while as I felt the emptiness in my stomach, but not real hunger. When the doctor walked in, I didn't have the strength to get up. "It's okay," he said. "It's a miracle that you're alive. When you arrived at the hospital, you were lacking 3/4 of your blood. One of the most severe cases of blood loss I've seen in my life." Blood loss? But I didn't suffer any injury, did I? Have I hurt myself upon falling in the office and had massive internal bleeding? "That's the worst part," said the doctor. "We have no idea what caused the blood loss. You have no injuries, internal or external. Please, tell me, do you use any kind of medication? Do you often drink aspirin or some painkiller that contains it?" But I didn't. I was a healthy 28-year-old woman with no previous health issues. The results were a shocker to me as much as they were for the doctors. My blood tests were fine, but the cause of such amount of bleeding was not found. The only thing the doctor could propose was to get a Doppler scanning of my blood vessels and see what's up with them. The results are haunting me to this day. Doctor was trembling as he was showing me the images. He himself had no explanation. I was the first such documented case in history. I was staring at the pale brown mass spreading through every blood vessel in my body. It looked exactly like roots, and it was sucking all the blood out of my body. "In order to save you, we'd have to do the impossible, to remove all of those roots," the doctor whispered. "But they've spread all over the left side of your body, from largest arteries to the smallest capillaries. There is no medical technology that could save you, miss. At the rate these things are taking your blood, you have just a few days of life left." I took a deep breath and told the doctor that I want to die in my house. I needed to call my parents and sister to inform them. and I needed to feed Ice Cream one last time. I know it might feel silly that I was caring about her so much at that moment, but I wanted to spend my last time with her. I declined doctors' offers to receive more blood. What was the point of prolonging a life for a few hours when those precious bags could be used for somebody who isn't doomed? Took a taxi to drive me home. I barely had the strength to walk inside, to open the door. I sat down onto my desk and stared at the plant. It has grown. Its flowers were blood red and abundant. Even some red berries were growing on it, but it looked like a mistletoe. I needed to know what type of mistletoe it was. They all have white flowers and fruit. A quick Google search revealed to me that the mistletoe is a half parasite. That means that it takes water from its host tree, but does photosynthesis on its own. But this plant was not attached to the host tree. My eyes rolled back to my left hand. The scar was now resembling just a small puncture wound. The little scratch that I got while cleaning the plant from the dead cat. Was that its previous meal? Am I its next one? Was Madame Davidson collecting the cats and dogs to feed her diabolical mistletoe? Ice Cream was still in her favorite position, front legs raised, slightly bent and leaning to the glass. I had to hold on to the wall to be able to walk to her terrarium. She was not taking her tiny black eyes off me. I wanted to give her a cockroach, the last one that she'll ever have from me. I wanted to watch her bite into the creature, liquefy its juicy insides and suck it out one last time. Spiders are able to destroy the insect's insides with their venom. And Ice Cream was trying to bite me. I don't know why, but I realized that there was something more to my girl than hairy legs and giant fangs. Maybe she was not scared of the plant for no reason. Maybe she knows what to do. I opened the terrarium. I knew how weak I was and how dead would Ice Cream be if I dropped her. But I needed her. I hid my left arm behind my back and slowly put the right one into her terrarium. I felt her hairy spider paws climbing onto it. She did not seem too agitated. I lifted her. God, she was so heavy. Listen, Icy. I whispered, looking into her tiny black eyes. You must be still. I will put you on the ground. Please, please don't move until I do it. She was listening to me. I felt it. She was calm and did not stop keeping an eye on me. I carefully placed her onto the carpet and laid down. Then I offered her my left wrist. Do it, girl. The pain of her bite was probably amplified by the overall weakness in my body. My whole left side was burning. I don't remember whether I was screaming or not. I just know that I fell unconscious. I woke up to Ice Cream's black and orange fluffy legs. She was mere inches from my face. My left arm was swollen and red with 2 big puncture wounds. Tarantula's venom isn't that potent though. With proper care, I'll be fine in a week or 2. But what caught my eye was a huge mess of black, rotting strings all over my carpet. They were the shape of the left side of a human being. The roots that have spread to my every organ were removed, gently liquefied by Ice Cream's bite. I somehow crawled to my desk. The plant was already drying. I didn't want to waste my strength on it, nor on the cleaning of the mess on the carpet. I called 911 as I needed another bag of blood, or several of them, and I was also bitten by a tarantula. What a wonderful day for them. But before they came, I gently took the spider from the floor and put it back into the terrarium. I switched the temperature to a little warmer, as she probably froze, spinning all night on the carpet. Hey, Ice Cream, I whispered. Guess who deserves 2 juicy cockroaches? I had all the time in the world, and I was going to trip. That was my first thought after getting fired from the movie theater. Yeah, I'd been caught watching movies on the clock again, but so what? Everybody did it when the concession stand was slow. The only reason they went after me for it was because Ray had it out for me. God, what an asshole. He was the worst manager I've ever had by far, by the way. I worked 5 days a week. Every week. But somehow I was never scheduled 2 days off in a row. I'm convinced Ray did that on purpose. He knew what I would do with those 2 days. He must have heard me talk about the way I like to trip. When I want to get high, and I mean really get high, I take 2 days. One for the actual trip, and one to sleep off the weird feeling the day after. So as a fuck you to me, he only ever gave me 1 day off at a time. Well, he wasn't my boss anymore, so I was prepared to turn my brain inside out. Actually getting my hands on the drugs was a hassle though. My friend Jason was the one who knew how to use a Tor browser, and where to go and how to pay with Bitcoin and all that. Look, I might be on my computer for 16 hours a day, but I don't know a whole lot about it. All I do is shitpost and get banned off forums. Though Jason had not been doing well, last I heard, he got a little too into hard drugs. I remembered him getting kinda scary when he was high, so I shudder to think of how messed up he's been since then. The last time I saw Jason was at a party just after high school. He was thin and his eyes were completely empty. People have said since then he has only gotten worse. He is now wholly unrecognizable. At least, that's what they say. It had been over a year since I last heard about him. People don't often talk with me about Jason. Honestly, people don't often talk with me at all. But none of that mattered because I got the drugs on my own. Who says smoking weed kills your memory? I'm high every day and I could still manage to wring the knowledge out. It took a little effort on my part, but I remembered where to go and what to do. The sun had just set. Bag in hand, I settled into my desk chair, prepared to go on a journey within my bedroom. The only light in my room was the glow coming from my computer monitor. I was glad it didn't brighten the whole room because I knew it was a mess. I was never one for cleaning, but after getting canned, I gave up on it entirely. It was okay though. I slept all day and never really turned the lights on when I was awake, so I never had to acknowledge it. Out of sight, out of mind. The best part was that I had a little audio-visual treat queued for my trip. One of the best kept secrets on the internet is that YouTube channel that uploads 12-hour-long videos of music and visuals that are specifically designed to enhance the effects of any drug you can imagine. Acid, shrooms, meth, all that. Kevin was the one who originally turned me on to this channel. Of course a freak like him would know about it. Everyone always knew Kevin was a little off. People at school just thought he was the quiet, weird kid. They never heard him after a few hits from the bong explaining his obsession with history's worst dictators or whatever fringe ideology he was into that week. When I saw his manifesto on the news, my heart dropped. That attack really fucked up our hometown for a while. In fact, that's probably what most people in this country think of when they hear the town name. The mood was somber after that. For a while, people didn't smile when they greeted each other. So fuck him. I didn't need him to track down the channel. That only took me a couple hours of searching on my end. I couldn't even ask him if I wanted to. He's in prison for the rest of his life. From what I could tell, you were supposed to snort the stuff, but rubbing it over your gums would do the job as well. I went with the second option because I wasn't a fan of burning nostrils. I untied the baggie and cupped the base, gazing into what looked like the center of a daisy inside wavy plastic petals. The stuff was coarse and white with sparkles of pink and purple. I hooked my finger and plopped some between my inner lip and my gum. It tasted like a combination of printer paper, baking soda, and quarters. I mean, no one said this shit was supposed to taste good. The point was to get you fucked up, and at that point, I was well on my way to achieving this goal. After gumming about half the baggie like a packet of Fun Dip, I sat back in my chair and pressed play on the video. A constant swirl of black, white, and lime green looped on my computer monitor, while a steady thudding bass pounded under a metallic melody. It was hypnotic. Periodically, the swirl would warp or switch directions, but this didn't distract from the sedating nature of the visual. In fact, it added to it. With each slight change, I felt like I was taking another step down into wherever this video was drawing me. That is when I felt the drugs kick in. It's not easy to notice you're high when you're sitting down in a dark room, but this shit hit me as swift as the drop in your chest you feel when leaning back too far in a chair. My body felt light, like there was air blowing through it. The few objects I could see on my desk, illuminated by my computer screen, looked fake. On the other hand, the swirling video looked all too real. As I was staring dumbfounded at my computer screen, the music became all-encompassing. It got louder and louder until the rhythm took me, and I was captive to the beat. I swayed to the beeps and boops that comprised the melody, lost in my trip. Once the music was in full swing, I heard what sounded like a voice come through buried under the noise. It was high-pitched and metallic at first, and I couldn't make it out. It sounded like it was repeating the same phrase over and over again. With each utterance, it became less robotic and more understandable. Finally, it became clear. Going down. You're going down. The voice kept repeating. Just then the music cut out, replaced by a low, whirring static. The visual was also gone, and in its place, a blue screen of death. What the fuck? I said. I sat up in my chair and pounded on the keyboard. I was well into my trip, but this really took me out of it. I felt like I was being suddenly woken out of a deep sleep and immediately expected to solve a riddle. Let me tell you, problem solving is not easy when you're high out of your mind. As I was excitedly mashing my keyboard and clicking all over my screen, I heard a sharp inhale behind me. I jolted and turned around. Gripping my chair as I felt the muscles in my face tense. My eyes had to adjust to the darkness of my room, but eventually I saw it in the corner among a pile of dirty laundry. Washed in the blue glow of my computer screen was a manifestation of Jason like I had never seen him. He was gaunt and his skin was dark and gray. His lips were dry and peeling out. His eyes were bulging out of his skull in a look of terror. Jason, the fuck, man? I said. I looked at him in disgust as he weakly raised his hand to me, as if he was trying to beckon me. Fix me, he gasped out. I need a fix. Fix me. The more I stared at him, the more I realized this wasn't Jason. It couldn't be. His skin was zombie-like and his movements completely lacked the life and energy of a human being, much less the person I remember. Well, I stared mouth wide open at whatever it was that looked like Jason writhing and murmuring among my dirty laundry. I heard my bedroom door burst open. I turned and saw a menacing figure rush toward me at inhuman speed. It stopped just above me, peering down at me. I sat trembling underneath it. It towered impossibly tall from my room, stretching my ceiling up in total blackness. It radiated an evil greenish-yellow hue and bared a wide, toothy grin. Worst of all, it looked like Kevin. The monster fixed a piercing stare down at me from high above, regarding me like an insect. Then it leaned down and put his hideous face just in front of mine. Miss me yet? It whispered sinisterly. In that moment, I wanted to bolt and run. I felt small and alone, afraid of what these monsters who looked like my former friends would do to me. I tried to flee, but I couldn't. I felt strapped and chained to my desk chair. I struggled to move my arms and legs as if they were weighed down. That's when I heard the laughing. At first, it was a faint and distant chuckle. but then it repeated and I heard it a few more times, and then a few more. Eventually I figured out that it was coming from my computer monitor. I turned toward it as the monsters in my room faded into the periphery. The swirl had returned to the screen. For some reason that I still cannot explain, this was attracting my attention while monsters occupied my room. The laughing grew. It got louder and more disembodied voices joined in the chorus. The one lady's cackle overpowered the rest. I could hear it on top of every other laugh, and I knew she was laughing at me. They were all laughing at me. They saw me scared and alone. They knew what a loser I was in the deplorable state I lived in. They knew I couldn't even hold down a job at the fucking movie theater, and they loved it. They thought it was hilarious. When I realized this, I started sobbing. It was the kind of crying that seeps out of you when you're at your lowest point. It reminded me of being a child. I felt small, and all I could do was heave and weep. "Leave me alone," I impotently shouted at the chorus of cruel laughs coming from my computer. "What a loser," they said. God, I feel embarrassed for him. More voices kept joining in, and I couldn't take it any longer. I started mashing my keyboard and frantically clicking my mouse. I tried all I could. I just wanted to make it stop. "I wouldn't do that, Stefan," the first voice from over the music said. "You're going down. There's nothing to stop it. You're going down." All the other voices fell away, and this one took control. I collapsed to the floor and scrambled under the desk, looking to unplug the cable from the socket. I couldn't see through my tears. I swatted wildly as I heaved and shook. The voice then changed to a deep, commanding bark. "Get him," it said. Following the voice's orders, the monster returned to my attention by seizing me and pulling me from under the desk. The one resembling Kevin stuck his claws deep into my back like hooks and dragged me across the floor. He then raised me to eye level by wrapping his hand around my neck. I felt my own blood drip down my shoulders from his nails. I struggled and flailed like a fish on a line to be free, but it was no use. I was forced to stare directly in his sharp, evil eyes. I heard his raspy breathing and watched his drool ooze through his pointed teeth. "It's your time, you freak," he hissed at me. I felt the monster, Jason, below me, stabbing and ripping at my legs with needles. He twisted the needles and tore my muscles at an agonizingly slow pace. I felt it all. I howled out in pain while the monster Kevin held me still and smiled at my tortured screams. Once my legs had been shredded beyond all use, the monster Kevin opened his mouth wide and tipped me down his gullet. Everything went black. For a moment, I felt a kind of nothingness that I had never felt before. It was as if all that real and tangible went away. All that was left was my consciousness, without anything to perceive. Then I felt a ray of light peek through, and my vision returned to me. I was on the floor of my room alone. Light shone in through my blinds. I looked around and saw piles of dirty clothes all around me. I found myself on top of musty hoodies and filthy socks. I was disgusted. It stank. I couldn't even see my carpet through all the filth and junk. Just then, memories of my terrible trip came back to me. I stood up and ran to my desk to check my computer monitor, only to find that it had been sleeping all night. I touched the computer below to confirm. It felt cool to the touch, like it hadn't been used in a while. Satisfied that what I was remembering was all just a horrific nightmare, I turned back to the mess in my room. I determined to clean up and get my life together. I was done living like a slob. Felt right to start small. I could do my laundry, make my bed, clean my room, stuff like that. Once I had that in order, I could tackle the bigger problems. I could go back to the theater and beg Ray for my job back. All I had to do was show him that I wasn't going to fuck around anymore. The old me was gone. It was time to introduce the new me. I looked at the sunshine coming in through my window and thought back to how much time I spent indoors wasting away. To begin my new transformation, I decided to go outside and feel the sun on my skin for the first time in who knows how long. I stepped out from my apartment into the hallway. It looked different in natural light, as opposed to the harsh fluorescence to which I had become familiar. I walked down the hall toward the elevator and saw that it was coming just as it came into view. I ran forward and stopped it before the doors could shut on me. As they reopened, I saw a petite older lady in a white shirt and red cardigan smiling at me. I smiled back and stepped in the elevator. "Going down?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied politely. I added a smile and a nod. It was strange for me to be neighborly like this. I felt like it was never expected of me. She pushed a button and stepped back behind me, holding a small purse in front of her. The elevator chimed in response and I felt it begin its slow and steady descent. As I stood facing the metal wall, I heard a slight chuckle behind me. I turned around and saw the lady was smiling and laughing to herself. I put on a pleasant face as she looked up at me. "What's funny?" I said. In response, she began laughing harder. My smile faded as her small giggle devolved into an insidious cackle. The lights of the elevator flickered, and I felt the ground shaking underneath me. I heard metal banging on the walls of the elevator, but the old lady's laugh preserved as the loudest and most commanding noise. "Going down," she said between breaths. "Going down." It was then that the lights cut out entirely and the elevator jolted, shooting me upward and crashing me into the roof. That was the last thing I remembered before I woke up in my room at night. I was laying on a pile of dirty laundry on the floor as my computer monitor swirled. My parents decided to bring us to a rented cabin my rich grandparents owned. It was in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. We didn't even live in Kentucky, but my dad specifically wanted to be reminded of a time of his childhood. On the way there, telling us extravagant stories about building snowmen, playing hide and seek, shooting water guns by the river that is currently frozen over. The place was pretty, but I still didn't want to be there. I would much rather be in my pretty candlelit bedroom at home in Detroit. Instead, I find myself in the middle of the woods, with buffering cell service and a creepy feeling lingering off the woods. My younger brother, Benny, looked pleased. An opportunity upon him to destroy more property. My older brother, Baron, annoyed, not wanting to be away from his gaming set for even a second. My dad ecstatic about reliving his memories. My mom trying to be happy for my father, but wary never having been to Kentucky. The day went normal. We all went our own ways. Benny, exploring. Baron, watching VHS tapes in the den. My dad constantly trying to get us to build snowmen, but being blown off. He cooked a nice meal with his childhood favorites. Turkey, baked potatoes, green beans, gravy, rolls, and a big Sunday bar. It was a rare occasion. My family actually taking time out of their lives to come together. Something they hadn't done since I was a toddler. I woke up that night to growling. A sound I once heard in a specific movie I couldn't remember. I sat in the corner of my cot against the wall, terrified of unknown dangers that lurked in the darkness outside. My father was shouting from another room, yelling my mom's first name and yelling to Benny to step back. I sat shaking until everyone stopped shouting. The growling stopped. bring the house silent. I sat in my corner of the tiny cot, my blanket wrapped around me. I grabbed my phone and checked the time to see it was 1 in the morning. I heard creaking and soft whispers as it seems everyone returned to their rooms. I sat for a while before falling to sleep in an uncomfortable, upright position. The next morning, it's as if nothing had happened. Nobody says anything. Not even my usually chipper younger brother Benny. In fact, he didn't say anything. It unnerved me, but I figured he got a spanking last night. But it didn't explain the growling. Today, we built some snowmen. Nobody sang a word. As if last night had put strain on our behavior. And it had. We cooked a nice meal. Together. I wanted to enjoy the rare family time, but it was hard to enjoy when Benny looked like he swallowed a thumbtack. The next morning, I woke up in the same way. Loud thrashing noises followed this time. Yelling, stomping, scratching. Benny screams. A high-pitched scream, one I can only describe as terror, and I hear a large splatter, like someone had dropped a gallon of water and spilled it on the garage floor. Silence. Benny begins to cry softly. I wanted to check on my baby brother, but I was terrified. Terrified of what sounded like an animal, and somehow terrified of my family. The next morning, Benny has red, puffy eyes at the table. My father gluing on his "God, I hate soccer" game smile at us as he flips a pancake, burned on one side. Baron looks as equally terrified. Your mother had to go back home to take care of some things. She'll be back soon enough. My father assured us, giving us every last crumb of burnt pancake mix. Instead of waking up to growling, I wake up to Benny shaking me awake, crying, getting me wet with something I had thought was his tears. "Mommy and Daddy," he said through tears. He plowed into my arms. I rubbed his hair, the tears in his curls. I turned the lamp on, not to see curls, but blood tangled into his hair. Clots of blood, even what looked like a chunk of skin. I looked at him in horror, as he shakily, in his 6-year-old vocabulary, told me what the fuck happened. The next morning I was tired. I had stayed up all night washing blood out of Benny's hair, trying to get the mats out, with the help of my older brother, who was shaken, more so than Benny, but tried not to show it. Benny took a nap on the couch, his head in my lap, his curls freshly restored as if there had not been blood, and what I had discovered was a sharp tooth. Baron had called the rangers in the area. No help could be sent, not until the blizzard cleared out. A very, very rare occurrence for Kentucky. Baron makes some hot chocolate and cookies for me and Benny. How could he stay so calm and collected? It's obvious he had witnessed the same gruesome incidents my brother had those 2 nights. First my mother, then my father. He was 17, yeah, but still not being able to show how fucking scary it is. My 15-year-old head ran all over the place, hoping it was an elaborate prank, knowing it truly wasn't. All the blood, a sight Benny and I never forgot. We all reluctantly went to sleep that night, cuddling close on the couch. 1 a.m. comes, the shadow on the wall, one I recognized to be my brother. His mouth retracted as I bounced up. He growled. Oh my fucking God. I pulled Benny close to me. I had no idea what to do. What had my brother become? Before I knew it, I had somehow grabbed my brother and booked it to the car. Unprepared, barely having a permit, never having driven through such harsh snow conditions. I still turned on the engine. the key left in the hole, putting the car into drive and speeding off the edge of the road by the cabin. I sped for so long, what felt like hours. Benny crying in his blanket. I drove through tears, a sharp pain in my stomach, blinking the tears away. I made it to the next small city, somehow making my way to an impressive small-town police station. I never saw Baron again, scared of him, what he was, what he still is. The police say he was just a child full of rage, a fucking Ted Bundy, they called him. He was sentenced to a high maximum security prison for life, no parole. I still have a feeling in my gut, a year later, that the police got the wrong brother. That afternoon, the downtown traffic splashed through rain puddles on the street, spritzing me as I rushed toward the Psychic studio on Main Street and Bloom. The Psychic's shop blazed on the corner in neon glory, illuminating the streets with incompatible shades of red. Bells chimed as I entered. Inside, red sequin disco lights, the size of pumpkins, swung from the chipped ceiling, emitting a pinkish glow into the closet-sized space. To the right, a burgundy velvet curtain separated the waiting area from the Psychic's chambers, clashing with the faded red shag carpet that looked like it had been stripped from the floors of a condemned motel circa 1970. Oh God, I thought, am I really doing this? A small voice interrupted my reverie. "May I help you, sir?" he said, his voice thick with an accent I couldn't trace. I smiled, buttoning my umbrella shut. I dried my hands on my coat and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I wanted to make an appointment with..." I pulled out my phone, then scrolled down to the contact that Josh had sent me when he insisted that I come here. "Ah, here it is. Esmeralda," I said, feeling awkward. I scanned the room for familiar faces, hoping not to find any, but I was the only customer. I had never been to a psychic. I felt ridiculous, but Josh said I had to see this psychic before she wasn't just any psychic. The man nodded. "Good, good," he said. A broad, eager smile spread across his face, revealing a missing front tooth. Plus, I admit, after hearing Josh's story, I was curious about this place. And then, of course, today was the anniversary of... "Esmeralda is very good," the man said, interrupting my thought. He stood about as tall as my chest, barely tall enough to see over the cash register. His head bobbed around as he spoke. I nodded, but I had to laugh at his enthusiasm. "Yeah, that's what my buddy said." The man glanced at the clock. "Esmeralda can see you in 20 minutes. I shrugged. "Sure, why not?" "Good, good." He smiled. After I paid, he gestured toward the empty burgundy chairs in the waiting area. "Please, have a seat." As I searched the crowdless room, I couldn't help but wonder, if this lady was such a master, why doesn't she have more customers? You'd think she'd have a longer wait list. After what seemed like an eternity, the burgundy curtain parted, and a short, portly woman in her mid to late 50s appeared. She wore a long burgundy gown, and her long gray hair was swept into a messy bun, secured to the top of her head with a pencil. Every finger on both hands glittered with jewels. She smiled when she saw me. "You must be Nick," she said, her voice warm. Wait, I thought, I didn't tell anyone my name, did I? She motioned toward me. I followed her past the curtain down the hall to her reading room, then gasped. Wow, I thought, grimacing at the explosion of quiche decor. It was an interior designer's nightmare. Red Gypsy Tiffany lamps stood on the side table next to a splayed deck of tarot cards, glittering candles and crystals, red-headed Hummel figurines, and other knickknacks. The room looked like a Christmas display gone awry, as though a drunk, angry reindeer had thrown up. I sat at the large round table where a candelabra stood in the center, surrounded by smaller gold and red candles. Esmeralda took the seat across the table and gazed at me, her blue eyes soft and maternal. Now, tell me what kind of reading you would like, she said. She must have sensed this was all new to me because she chuckled at my expression. Let me explain, she said. I do tarot readings, where I read cards that tell you about a life problem. And I do palm readings, and I do medium readings, where I summon the deceased, who speak through me. That's the simple answer. So, during medium readings, can you summon anyone? She nodded. Pretty much, she said. Unless they don't want to talk. That has happened, but not often. She studied my reaction, then flashed a knowing smile. That's the one you want, isn't it? She asked, her voice gentle. She paused, shuffling a deck of cards. Then, is your loss recent? My stomach fluttered. Was it that obvious? It isn't that recent, I said, avoiding her gaze. She set aside the tarot cards she had been shuffling and reached for my hands, taking me by surprise. Her hands were warm and maternal. A strange energy coursed through my hands as she held them. I want you to know that your mother is okay, she said. A thread of tears burned in my eyes, but I fought them back. I wasn't going to be that guy. Today is a special day, isn't it? She said. But she already seemed to know the answer. I nodded. Today is the first anniversary of her death, I said, looking down at the worn red carpet. She nodded, sympathetic. Here's what we do, Nick, she said. I light a candle, and you close your eyes. I guide you through a meditation, and then we ask your mother to join us. All you have to do is follow my instructions and tell me what images come up for you through the meditation. Okay? Okay. But before we start, there are 3 things you should know. 1, always keep your eyes closed unless I tell you otherwise. 2, if you feel overwhelmed, tell me and we'll stop. 3 is the hardest, but you should know. What is it? Sometimes they change. What do you mean? She shrugged. Just like we grow and change, well, our deceased loved ones do too. Usually, it isn't a dramatic change, but you should be prepared. The thought concerned me, but it didn't sound like I needed to worry too much. Did I? Before I could think about it, she continued. She smiled. Ready? I nodded. Let's do this. Remember, she said, keep your eyes closed. I didn't bother to ask why. Just follow my voice. I settled into my seat. Close your eyes, she said, her voice gentle like the spring wind. I obeyed, and I listened. A match sounded and the scent of lavender filled the room. Light, invigorating, relaxing. A click sounded from across the table, then a soundtrack played at low volume. ambient nature sounds, with rushing waterfalls and rhythmic chanting. It was just loud enough. "Breathe in," she said, her voice slow and soft. "And breathe out." I inhaled, then exhaled. Again, breathe in and out. I relaxed, melting into the sound of her voice. "Let the images come," she said. And they did. Imagine you are traveling through a tunnel, a long, dark tunnel with a soft white light all the way down at the end. The tunnel is taking you back in time. Back in time. My body relaxed, growing heavier with each breath. I breathed again, deeper and deeper. I followed the tunnel toward the light, going back and farther back in time. And the house appeared. "Where are you now, Nick?" "My parents' house," I said. I described their white stone house with ivy climbing up the walls and the greenhouse in the backyard. "Tell me about the greenhouse." I described each image as it surfaced. It's all glass, filled with plants and tons of ivy. And inside the greenhouse, a shovel is propped against the wall. I see it when I walk inside. "Good, Nick," she said, reassuring me. "Now, what else?" "At first, it doesn't look like anyone is there," I said, seeing snapshots of that day again in my mind, stunned by the clarity of the images. The detail was so vivid, so crisp. Then I see my mom's purse on the ground, tipped over with all her belongings spilling out. I call her name, but nothing. Then what, Nick? Then I hear someone groan from the back of the greenhouse. I don't see anyone around, but I hurry toward the sound, following it, calling for her. "Mom, Mom." But nothing. And what happened next? Then I find her in the back, curled up on the ground. She's clutching her chest but can't speak. I panic, breathless. I grab my phone and dial 911. Then what? I can't keep her awake. I try to, but by the time the ambulance comes, I could have... "No, Nick," Esmeralda said, reassuring me before I even finished my sentence. "You couldn't have done more than you did. It was her time, you see." A hot sting of tears returned, but I fought them back and kept breathing. "But she is with you, Nick," Esmeralda said. "And she is here now. She says she wants to speak to you. Is that okay?" I nodded. "Okay, Nick," Esmeralda said. "Keep your eyes closed as I perform this next step." I nodded again. Something rustled. Then the scent of jasmine wafted through the room. Esmeralda hummed and chanted. I waited. "Barbara May," she said. "We ask you to join us, Barbara May. Your son, Nick, has asked you to join us today. Speak through me, Barbara May," she said, conjuring her spirit like a magician. I listened with my eyes shut. Never mind that I hadn't told her my mother's name, or even my name for that matter. At this point, I no longer cared how she knew the things she did. As I waited, the energy in the room shifted. A chill pierced the air. I shivered. When Esmeralda spoke, I froze. Instinctively, I knew Esmeralda wasn't the one speaking anymore. Esmeralda was gone now. Nick? The voice said, her voice soft and careful, as though trying not to frighten me. I knew that voice. I had always known that voice. It was the first voice I had ever heard. A whirlwind of emotion tumbled through me. Mom? I kept my eyes shut, just as Esmeralda had instructed, and I waited. It's me, Nick, she said. I wanted to open my eyes, but a part of me was too afraid of what I might see. Nick, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've missed you, sweetheart. My eyes burned again, but I fought hard, holding back. Why did you leave, Mom? I asked, forcing back the emotion. She sighed. I didn't want to go, Nick. Believe me, I didn't. Then why? I started, but knew the question was of no use. Listen, she said, her voice sounding firmer, more insistent. I need to tell you something while I'm here. What is it? She sighed again, as though contemplating whether to tell me something. As I waited, my heart fluttering in my chest. Honey, she said, sounding nervous. What is it? I asked. Something wrong? This is ridiculous, I thought. Why can't I open my eyes? But I had promised Esmeralda. Nick, she said, I'm not happy here. Something in her voice, it didn't sound right. What do you mean? I asked, my anxiety growing. Something didn't feel right. I tried to ignore it. This place, she said, the pitch of her voice rising. Nick, it's so dark. Her voice lowered, then deepened. It's so dark here, Nick. Chills swept over me. Goose pimples raced up my spine like electric tickles. They didn't sound like my mother anymore. This couldn't be my mother. Then I remembered Esmeralda's warning. Sometimes they change. I've done a bad thing, Nick, she said. An ominous tone leaked from her voice as though she was harboring a secret. What? What are you talking about, Mom? I asked, even though I wasn't sure this was my mother. I've done a terrible thing, Nick, she continued, sounding agitated. What did you do, Mom? I asked, not wanting to know. Just know that I did it out of love, she said. He had nothing left to live for. But I could hear the lie in her voice. I couldn't stand the loneliness, she said, her voice thick with desperation. I found a pickaxe and... No, I shouted, but she wouldn't stop. I had to, Nick. I was so alone. What did you do, Mom? I asked, my heart racing and thumping like a juiced-up gymnast in my chest. What did you do? I didn't want to hurt. She tried to sound apologetic. Then her voice trailed off. My stomach churned. Esmeralda, I begged. I need you to come back now. But nothing. Esmeralda, I shouted. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to open my eyes, but what would I see if I did? But my mother kept speaking. Nick, I have 3 warnings I must give you before I leave, she said, sounding unfazed by my terror. I don't want to know. I pressed my hands against my ears to tune her out, but couldn't. She spoke louder, sounding more authoritative. 1, she said. The body is buried behind the garage. Look for the fresh mound of dirt. No, I shouted, sobbing, imagining my poor father. 2, she continued, her voice unwavering and merciless. Don't climb on rooftops, or you'll get hurt. Stop, I shouted. What was she talking about? And 3, she said, ignoring my protests. I'm sorry, Nick, but a much, much worse fate awaits you. That was it. I couldn't resist it any longer. I had to look. Without a second thought, I opened my eyes, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing in front of me, in all her dead glory, was my mother, but not the mother I had loved and remembered. This mother was gray-skinned and wild-eyed, her once blue eyes cold and steely, her cheeks gaunt, her eyes sunken. Her once silky blonde hair was coiled into a gnarled gray mess. She stared at me, unblinking like a grotesque statue. In her eyes, I saw the absence of everything that should have been in a mother's gaze. Esmeralda! I shouted. Come back. I want this to end now. But my mother kept talking as though she hadn't heard me. I'm sorry it has to end this way for you, Nick. And how? I asked, not wanting to know, but needing to know. But with that, the room went dark and the candle flame blew out, as though extinguished by some phantom breath. A moment later, the light flipped back on and Esmeralda stood in front of me, calm and serene, as though she hadn't heard or seen a thing. What was that? I asked. What happened to my mother? Esmeralda shook her head. Sometimes they change. As I drove home after the reading, I crept down the freeway at the speed of a geriatric heading to a bingo game after church. I was too afraid of what might happen. The speed limit was 60. I drove 35. I ignored the many people who honked at me and gave me the finger. When I got home, I texted my dad, but never heard back. I was too afraid to go to his house, even though I wanted to. I tried to convince myself that my psychic reading had all been some elaborate mind trick or a prank. The next morning, I called Josh, but he didn't answer. Minutes later, I got a call from an unknown number. The deep voice of a stranger replied on the other end. Nick May? He asked. Yeah? Afraid I've got some bad news. What? Is your father Jerome May? Yeah, I said, feeling sick with anticipation. I'm afraid he's had an accident. Fell off the roof doing home repairs. It happened about an hour ago. Wait, what? Then who was buried behind the garage? I wondered. What the hell? What happened? A neighbor reported a strange noise coming from your father's home. Said he heard a man scream. After he called the station, we sent law enforcement to the scene. When the officer alighted from the vehicle, he heard the voice of an older, unidentified male subject calling from a bush on the property. He headed toward the sound and found your father incapacitated. Incapacitated? I asked, confused. Yeah, a broken arm, he said. Might want to head down to the hospital for a visit. Is he going to survive? I asked. Probably. As I dressed to go to the hospital, I flipped on the TV and listened to the news. A breaking news story interrupted the usual morning program. Breaking news, a news anchor said. This just in. Around 5 o'clock this morning, police responded to an anonymous tip that a body had been buried in the backyard of a home in the quiet Dover Hills neighborhood, located on the southeast corner of Hammond Street and Trinity Avenue. Once on scene, police discovered the body of this 20-something male, buried in a shallow grave. When the picture appeared on the screen, I dropped my coffee. Josh. The anchorman continued. The man has since been identified as 25-year-old Joshua Williams. But I didn't hear the rest. I thought back to last night. 2 out of the 3 warnings had already come true. I grew restless as I replayed my mother's words. A much, much worse fate awaits you. Now I can't help but wonder what happens next. I have been to the well 3 times. On the first time, I was 6. I went with my dad. My father had been reared on the outdoors. He lived for it. Every chance he got, he was out backpacking, fishing, hunting, anything. It was an addiction for him, one that would eventually kill him. 20 years after this story, he was climbing up a waterfall when he slipped and fell to his death. But he died doing what he loved, and he aimed to instill that love onto me. As a result, from the moment I could walk, I had spent more time in the woods than indoors. On this occasion, we were camping, as we had done many times before, though never in this area of the woods. Though my father sought to teach me as much as he could about the outdoors, he realized a 6-year-old wouldn't be much help setting up a tent. He told me not to wander too far and set to work grappling with the tent, promising me we would have some cookies once he had finished. That naturally excited my young self, and I was practically giddy as I bounced around waiting for him to finish. After several repeats of, "Are you done yet?" and my dad's grunts becoming increasingly frustrated as the tent fought with him, he told me to go take a walk and come back in a few minutes. I headed off into the woods, listening to bird calls and trying to spot where they were coming from. After several minutes, I walked into a darker section of the woods. It was at that time where I noticed a peculiar smell emanating from somewhere nearby. It was the smell of baking cookies. Thinking my dad had finished, I excitedly ran off towards the smell, my young mind not comprehending my dad couldn't bake cookies in the woods, or that the smell was coming from the opposite direction of my camp. I ran for 2 or 3 minutes before coming to a stop in a small clearing. The first thing I noticed was how much darker the woods were. This, despite the fact that all the trees in the area were leafless, dead, and wilted. The ground was spongy. Water, or some other liquid, flowed up with every step I took, squashing the already wilted grass. Then I saw the well. It was sitting in the middle of a clearing, a small circle of stones rising up 2 or 3 feet. Various tree roots had dug themselves into the stones, as if trying to get at the water contained inside. Though the trees themselves had long since wilted and died, there was no roof or bucket attached. I realized that's where the smell of cookies were emanating from. I approached and peered over the edge of the stones. There was no water in the well, just a seemingly endless pit of blackness. I picked up a stone and dropped it in, and never heard it hit the bottom. Then as I watched, a liquid silently bubbled up from the depths and came to a stop mere inches from my face. It had the consistency of water, with a slightly cloudier appearance. I realized the liquid was the source of the smell of cookies. I stuck my face into the liquid and began to gulp it. The taste was indescribable. It tasted like cookies, along with candy and every other delicious item a 6-year-old could ever imagine. I knew at that moment I would never taste anything better than that liquid. I began gulping faster and faster, not even stopping to breathe. I couldn't imagine ever stopping. I wouldn't ever stop. I would stand here forever gulping down this delicious, heavenly, indescribable liquid from this well. My vision began to blur. My head became light. I kept on gulping the liquid. I felt something touch my shoulder. I ignored it, continued to aggressively gulp down the liquid. The touch turned to shaking. Something began pulling me away from the well. I kicked and screamed in protest, desperate not to be taken away from the liquid. I had to get more. I wanted more. I needed more. My eyes opened. I was sitting in the camp next to my dad, the tent finally up in one piece. My dad was holding a cookie out to me. "Here," he said. I took it and began nibbling it. It tasted nowhere as good as the liquid from the well. I looked out into the woods but realized the smell from the well was gone. On the second time, I was 18. I went with my best friend. We had just recently graduated high school, and to celebrate, we had gone for a week-long camping trip in the woods. Naturally, being the age we were, we brought along a fair amount of illicit substances, and spent more time that week high than sober. I mostly stuck to weed and some mushrooms. My friend was into stronger substances. While I had been high most of the week, I am fairly confident I was sober during this event. It was our last night before heading home, and I hadn't taken anything in the past few days, since it was my job to drive us home in the morning. My friend was tripping on who knows what, and was lost in some cocktail of drugs, just staring at the sky and giggling intermittently. Eventually I got sick of listening to him and decided to take a walk. The last rays of sunshine dipping below the horizon gave the woods an eerie, unnatural appearance. Shadows seemed to stretch and bend in every direction, giving the woods a wild and untamed appearance. It looked far different than the first time I had been here. Not that I would have remembered anyway. I had long since repressed my memories of the well, and it was only this encounter with it that would bring my memories back to my mind. At some point, I began to smell something indescribable. I truly have no words for it. It wasn't like the baking cookies from the last time. Something much more ethereal, but just as unimaginably attractive. I followed the smell into the same clearing as before, and there the well was, sitting just as it had been. The smell continued to draw me in closer. At that point I noticed something strange. There was the skeleton of a deer, laying next to the well. It had its head down into the well, as if it had died while drinking from it. I suspect it did. Littered around it were several rotting carcasses of wolves, having been drawn to the well by the deer. Something in the corners of my mind, alarm bells went off, and I was overcome with the most overpowering sense of deja vu. But the smell was too overwhelming. I looked down into the well. The water, or some other liquid, silently rose towards me. It had the same milky quality it had before, but the smell had changed. Without a moment of hesitation, I dunked my head in and began to inhale as much liquid as I could. It was just as amazing as I remembered, maybe even better. I began scooping water into my hands so I wouldn't have to stop when I lifted my head to breathe. I drank and drank, desperate to get more of this indescribable heavenly substance into my mouth. I began to clamber into the well, desperate to bathe in the liquid, to absorb it through every pore in my body. My head became light, my vision blurred. The slurred speech of my roommate stirred me as he shook my shoulder. Though his days of semi-conscious words, he told me it was time to get to bed. I found myself back at the tent, and we headed into our sleeping bags. I didn't sleep at all that night. I was too focused on the well. My memories of the encounter when I was 6 came back. I was filled with a desperate sense to go back and drink from it once more. But something told me it was a bad idea, and I managed to resist the temptation. We packed up and left in the morning. After that summer, I moved away for college. My best friend stayed in town for his school. Over the years, his drug problem became worse, and when we were both juniors, he died of an overdose. I went back home for the funeral, then left again. I stayed away for many years, until finally love and circumstance brought me back home, back to the well. On the third time, I was 40. I went with my wife. The well was calling out to me. I sensed it from the moment I entered those woods. My wife had never heard my encounter with the well, and seemed unaffected by the smell. The smell was different again, but still indescribable. Absolutely irresistible. It seemed to pour from every orifice and tree within the forest. As soon as we finished setting up our tent, I told my wife I was going on a walk. She plopped herself into a lawn chair, lit up a cigarette, and told me to have fun. I walked with purpose. I didn't know where I was going, but I did know the well would lead me to itself. The contagion from the well seemed to have spread. A much larger area of sodden ground and dead trees. The influence of the well was growing. I rounded a corner, and there it was. The extraordinary liquid just waiting for me to take a taste. The deer skeleton was gone. There was a man there, and he was alive. His back was towards me, and he didn't seem to notice me as I approached. He was on his knees, head inside the well. I heard him lapping from the liquid like a dog. I walked up to him and tried to get his attention. He ignored me. I shook his shoulder. He shook me off and continued drinking. Finally, I wrenched him from the well and made him face me. His pupils were gone. In their place were just pure white orbs that seemed to function as eyes. He was emaciated. His skin was pulled tight over his thin body. His stomach was bloated, though it only contained liquid. No food whatsoever. He seemed to be only days away from starvation. His legs appeared to just be useless appendages. He had been kneeling for so long. His jaw hung open. He seemed to be unable to close it. I let out a yelp and jumped back. The man regarded me for a moment with his white, orb-like eyes. Then he turned and resumed his lapping from the well. I turned and ran until I collapsed at the feet of my wife. She asked me what was wrong. I told her I just saw a bear. We packed up the tent and moved to a different spot in the woods. I swore then I would never return to that well. For 20 years, I was able to keep that promise. But then my wife died of lung cancer. I felt the well calling to me once again, and I was too overwhelmed with grief to resist. On the 4th time, I am 60. I go alone. The forest is dying. The well's infection is only spreading faster as it goes on. Every dead tree, every animal carcass, from everything in those woods pours the smell of the well. The smell is indescribable, but it seems to smell like peace. I want peace. At least the illusion of peace. I need to move on, but I know the well does not help with that. It is the well of wants. It gives you what you want, not what you need. And now all I want is to dunk my head into that heavenly well and never ever lift it again. That is exactly what I plan to do. One hot summer day, I was walking with my friends around my city having a fun time. We had a few drinks and enjoying our lives before leaving for college. We had so much fun that we forgot to check what time it was, and to our surprise, we had lost the last bus ride that could bring us back home. All of our parents were sleeping, and we didn't want to wake them up to give us a ride back home, so we decided to walk back home. Here I have to mention that my friends and I actually enjoy taking long walks, but we had never before walked at 2 o'clock at night. And the worst part was that we were kind of drunk, so we knew that the walk home would be long. So we started walking from the city center back to the suburbs where we lived. We calculated that it should take around 1.5 to 2 hours, depending on how fast we would be walking and how many breaks we would have. The ride home was long, and we would have to walk through some sketchy neighborhoods. That was the part that freaked me most. You see, my other friends were more brave. I was always the overprotective guy who got scared easily. So walking through those dark alleys, which had no good reputation, creeped me out a little. Some time passed by, and we had walked halfway. The boys were a bit tired, and not gonna lie, so was I. So we decided to sit for a while and then continue to walk. While we were sitting and catching up our breaths, a guy approached us. He was tall, very skinny, and smelled really, really bad. At the point we couldn't bear the smell. Instead of leaving, we decided to stay for 2 to 3 more minutes and then continue, thinking that the guy would leave us alone, but he didn't. He actually came closer to us, and then he said with a raspy voice, "Hey boys, do you have a cigarette or two to spare?" None of us smoked at the time, so we nodded our heads, and I said politely, "No, sorry man, we don't." I expected that after that the guy would leave, but he didn't. Instead he asked us another question. "Okay then, maybe you have some change so I can buy a pack, don't you?" The problem was that we actually didn't. We had spent it all for the drinks and to buy the bus tickets that we ended up not using. So we didn't have any way to make that guy leave. "No, sir, we don't have any money," my friend George said aggressively. At first that seemed to make the guy less interested, and he started walking away, but in our surprise he turned around and started running back to us. We started to run too as a group, and although the guy who was chasing us seemed weak, he could actually run fast and he was catching up on us. That was when John, our other friend, screamed at us, "Guys, we have to split up, otherwise he will catch all of us." At the time it sounded like a good idea, but as I'm writing the story, I regretted our actions at the time. We split up, took 3 different ways, and at first I thought that the plan worked because the guy stopped chasing us. I continued running, got in an alley, and hid behind some trash. There were a few seconds of silence until I heard some motorcycles and the same raspy voice of the guy saying angrily, "We have to find them no matter what." I was scared and confused. Why do they need to find us? How many of them were outside searching for us? We had no money and nothing expensive on us. That was worth stealing. Why was the guy and his friends searching for us? All these thoughts were running through my mind at the moment when I felt a hand touch my shoulder. My heart sank. I turned my head and I was relieved to see it was George. "You scared the crap out of me," I said. George apologized, said he didn't mean to scare me. "We have to find John," he said, and I agreed. Walking on our tiptoes now, we were moving behind cars and being very careful not to make any noise. After 15 minutes of searching, we had neither heard from John nor seen the guy and the others on the motorcycles. That's when we thought it was safe to call John. The phone rang a few times and then it went to voicemail. We tried one more time. The same thing. Once again, and no answer. We continued walking towards home, and after 2 to 3 minutes of walking, my phone rang. It was John. I answered immediately. "John, where are you? We're looking for you so we can go back home all together." but instead of hearing John's voice, I heard the raspy voice of the guy who was chasing us. He said, "I don't think John can answer the phone right now. And I have to say, it wasn't a very good idea to call him 3 times. Oopsies," he said while laughing. I closed the call right away. "George, what should we do now?" he said. "I have no clue. This has never happened to me before." We were very scared, didn't know what to do, and we were still a 45-minute walk away from home. Then it hit me. "There's a police station nearby. We have to go there now," I said. We ran to the police station, and I was hoping that the cops could track John's phone and find him. We reached the police station and tried to explain everything that happened as calm as we could. The police officers called our parents and began to search instantly. Our parents took us back home. Mine scolded me for not calling them and for our idea to walk back home. I didn't sleep that night. I was thinking, where's John? Wondering if he was hurt, and many scenarios passed by my mind. The next day, George and I testified at the police station with exact details of what happened, and I believe I gave a pretty good description of the guy. A few days passed by, and we had been informed that John's phone was found near the area I was hiding, inside a dumpster, but no clue where my friend was. That night was the last I have seen John. All this happened a few months ago, and I still have hope that my friend is somewhere out there, still alive. For the last several years, I have worked as an overnight cleaner for many establishments, working the graveyard shift as a janitor. As of the last year or so, I've been at this famous tourist trap restaurant. People traveling through the area can't help but stop at this seemingly quaint little rinky-dink spot in my local area, to which I shall keep unnamed in order to avoid some other kind of surge in interest. The night shift never bothered me too bad, aside from wanting to sleep through my shift for the first year or so on this type of schedule. Of course, not being bothered didn't change when I came to said restaurant. As a matter of fact, I thought it would be considerably less worrying than some gigantic office building all to myself. However, lately, creepy things have come up. Not to say I have any clue as to what it is, so don't come crawling to me looking for answers. You won't find any. Do you ever see cracks on the wall? Maybe the floor or the ceiling of whatever room you're in at the time. This place is old, so things like that are everywhere. Floorboards spreading out from being warped, paint chipping, doors hanging just slightly ajar. For some reason, in the last few months, my eyes have drifted to these spots in the restaurant, noticing every little nook and cranny, every crevice. Every time it sends some tingle down my neck, for whatever reason. Like when I look, there will be something ready to make eye contact with me. But stuff like this is easy enough to brush off. The main thing I know I would legitimately have to worry about is some meth head trying to break in or something crazy. Except one night, things were a little different. Like I said, don't ask me what happened because I really don't know for sure. I clean toilets for a living, for God's sake. This is above my pay grade. This one night, last Thursday I think, I was heading to the gift shop of the restaurant listening to my usual music. I unlocked the door and headed inside. In the door is just an open room full of racks and t-shirts and what have you. To the left is the counter, and toward the back of the room in the center of the wall is a door that leads to the bathrooms. Janitor's closet on the right, and a door across from the men's room to the left that led up to what I assume is the storage and office to the shop. I'm not too sure, I've never gone up there. The door to the upstairs is usually cracked open from people leaving, and I usually close it. Tonight, I didn't. I started my usual routine and began cleaning the bathrooms. Midway through the first bathroom, I thought I heard a faint creak but decided it was my imagination. Until I looked over and saw dust from the paint on the ceiling had floated to the floor. This made me just a little nervous, because usually no one was there by that time. It was already midnight or so, and the latest anyone stays from the gift shop is about 10:30. Thought to myself it must have just been something left on a desk that couldn't maintain balance. Finally toppled over due to the building adjusting. I suddenly found my eyes slowly making their way up to the ceiling to look for where the dust fell. I felt uneasy, but what did I have to worry about? That's what I thought anyway. No reason for paranoia. My gaze hit the little bumps on the popcorn ceiling, but for some reason, I couldn't line my eyes up with this chip in the paint up there. There was the most minimal amount of light coming from it. It must have been a crack deep enough to let light pour down through the floorboards from upstairs. I, however, was compelled to not look right at that crack. What's wrong with me? I shook that off soon enough and continued to clean. Mopping the first bathroom completed, so I started out the door and turned the light off. Right as the light was going off and the door was shutting, did I see some kind of shape just standing in there? I yanked the door open and flipped the light back on, but nothing. I'm tripping, was what I thought to myself. Finally, I started working on the next bathroom. I just had to get through this room and I could leave to the main restaurant. At least then I would have someone else in the building with me. Once I got into my groove, I didn't even think about anything creepy. I even sighed a little relief to try to lower my heart rate when it jumped right back up due to an even louder crash from upstairs. It sounded like a freaking body toppling over or something. Maybe someone jumping up and down. Who knows? All I know is that it was loud and I was supposed to be alone. Even though my heart was pumping in my ears, I still ran out of the bathroom to check. Us as cleaners were also supposed to be the surrogate security force of this building, so I felt compelled. Instant regret washed over me as soon as I stepped out. I ran out of the bathroom, shoving the door which made it swing closed behind me. Right then, when I was an instant away from saying something, or doing something, or God forbid go upstairs, I saw it. Well, I didn't necessarily see it. As in, I didn't look right at it. But when I stepped outside that bathroom, I was immediately in my peripherals. In the crack of the door leading up to the attic, an eye, a bloodshot eyeball. I was frozen. No facial features. I couldn't even see a face. That shouldn't be possible if I can see the eye, right? It should be close enough to see a brow, a mouth, a nose. Not moving, it continued to stare at me and continued to observe. My best chance was to run away if it made any sudden moves. I hoped at least. Just one red and veiny, completely bloodshot eyeball stared at me from the shadows. The light was off upstairs somehow. Was it ever on? It didn't matter. What did matter was how the hell I could get away. I didn't even know what I was facing. I didn't look at it. Not directly, but it felt like it wanted me to. I felt like I wanted to. That was wrong, though. Very wrong. What I can only imagine were fingers slowly stretched out and clasped the door. I could hear the hinge creaking ever so slightly. Oh, God. It was going to come out, wasn't it? I couldn't move. All I felt was a single bead of sweat running down the right side of my face and a tear down the left. It creaked. Slowly. So slowly. I didn't want that to be how I died. Slowly, with creeping, gray, and bloated fingers grasping me, I was about to blubber like a baby. Out of nowhere there was a knock at the front door. It was my coworker. He started hollering about how I was since I was taking so long. He got his keys out to unlock the door. The second I glanced over to the front was all it took. I looked back at the crack in the door, not peripherals. Looked at it directly. Nothing was there. My coworker asked if everything was okay. I just nodded and said yeah, all while staring at that crack. To this day, nothing like that has happened, and I haven't changed jobs. I like what I do and don't really have many options with what's near me. Ever since that night, though, I keep my eyes fixed to one place. I've memorized anywhere in my routine where a crack would be, though I don't look at them directly, and haven't had any more experiences. I always check them. Every time I pass by one on the ceiling or the wall, I always watch it in my peripherals, but never directly.